going to head into part 2 of my review at 5-10 primarily, but also playing some higher and lower stakes in the process. We're going to head right into the next hand, which is hand number 3 out of our highlight wheel, holding King 10-9, 7-4 double suited on the button. Looks kind of strong, specifically from a 4-card background. If we were to forget about the 4 of hearts, this hand looks pretty nice. But in reality, let's have a look at how strong the hand actually comes up here in the ranking system. So we're holding King 10, 9, 7, 4, double suited with a trip suit. Going to the rankings, we will see this hand here 6-handed, still in the tank. Again, if you put in the exact suits behind the exact cards, then it's going to go faster. Between 27 and 36, so still seems fine to open here on the button. I would think that the open raise frequencies are very similar to 4-card PLO on the button. You're going to be opening around 50% of hands, where here you can actually call more 3-bets. Equities run closer, position is more valuable, so therefore opening at least 50% should be fine. So we do open, and the big blind will eventually call. And we're going to head into a very interesting flop decision that I went into more detail beforehand, and some surprising results came out of it. And I hope you guys can see that I didn't mark out a lot of these opponents here because I have never seen them on 4-card PLO tables, which is definitely great news and speaks for the softness of the game in itself. So here we go. My opponent now leads into me, and for $55 on ace 8-6. The first thing to notice is that we don't have any pair blocker. And also that aces are not being 3-bet nearly as often in this format than in 4-card PLO, because the side cards matter so much in order to realize your equity. As I talked already in the first part, when you have bad aces in 4-card PLO, you can justify 3-betting much more often, especially when you're able to lower the SPR from in position, so on the button versus the cutoff, and when you can also count on people sometimes 4-betting new light. But here, out of position, big blind versus button, a lot of the aces are not going to 3-bet, because they're not going to hold enough backup. So as I mentioned, it's around 50% likely you have a double suited hand, and you think about aces here, and the fact that 50% of the aces are not going to be double suited, then it starts to make more sense why we can definitely assume that our opponent might have aces in this instance. So holding aces here, we are looking at double suited aces here around 2% of the time. And when we deny that and say how often do we have non-double suited aces, you can see it is actually a higher percentage than 2% of the time. So more often than not, our aces are not going to be double suited. Now, of course, sometimes these aces can also be quite connected, and that's fine too. And suited to an ace, notice that there are also single suited aces possible that don't have a suited ace, but still around 40%, 50% of the aces are not going to be great. And therefore, it is actually possible that this guy has top set. Now, is that a big problem when we have a wrap and 2 backdoor flush draws? And in game, I thought it might not be, because I have such a big draw, especially with the 2 backdoor flush draws. But I think this is where sort of like one of my preconceptions about PLO coming from 4-card PLO have tricked me a little bit. So I raised your pot thinking my opponent must be weak. He hasn't 3-bet pre-flop. Again, that is already a myth that I've busted. He can definitely have top set here. But here's another problem. In 5-card PLO, when our opponent does have ace 8 or 8-8 or top set, he's going to have a backdoor flush draw that is covering our backdoor flush draw more often because he has more cards, but also he's going to share the straight cards we have more often as he has 5 cards. And therefore, we are going to have less equity in 5-card PLO in this instance versus 4-card PLO when all the money goes in. And therefore, we got to be careful to not overvalue these wrap hands, because our opponents might share the draws with us while holding a better mate hand. In fact, this time we have king high. We also have 3 hearts in our hand. And our opponent can easily have top set with backdoor hearts and an inside straight draw and just lead the flop to induced, in which case we are not going to do well. Let's have a look at the equities here in a moment. So The board is the ace of clubs, 8 of spades, 6 of hearts. We are holding the king, second of clubs, 9 of hearts, 7 of hearts, 4 of hearts, and the 10 of clubs. And let's assume we are going to run into aces. And now a lot of the aces are probably not going to lead if they don't have additional equity, if they don't have some playability features on the side. We can see here we are flipping right now against aces. But if our opponent has no straight draw, no backdoor flush draw, is he really going to lead into us? And the answer is probably not. So if we assume that he either has 2 backdoor flush draws, that could be clubs or spades, it could be clubs and hearts, or it could be spades and hearts. He could also have a 7-9, 7-5, like either of these backup options. Then we are already dropping here to 46%. And again, realize that we are not blocking any of the pairs. It makes it more likely our opponent is in fact holding a very strong mate hand when he leads into the flop here and is not going to fold. Now in this instance, actually, our opponent ended up folding, and it makes it quite easy for us to just sort of brush it off and think, well, worked out well, let's move on to the next hand. But again, I think the big takeaways here are really that we shouldn't overvalue our draws, because our opponents can have better mate hands with the draw, and that our opponents can have many more aces in his pre-flop range than in 4-card PLO and represent stronger hands on that board. Next hand here, heads up at 5-10. We are looking at Jack 7-5-4-3, a very weak hand, open raising the button, calling a 3-bet, and we flop an inside straight draw at the bottom here, the 3-4-5, backdoor 4 high hearts. They aren't really worth that much. And because my opponent ended up betting so small, I decided to call. I think that is okay. If he bets larger, we want to fold for sure. It's not only that, it's not only that we get a worse price when he bets larger with our hand, but also in 5-card PLO in comparison to 4-card PLO, our opponent, when we do turn a straight like now, is going to have more equity when all the money goes in comparison to 4-card PLO. Also, if the turn is a higher straightening card, like a Jack, Queen, or 10, our opponent is going to make a straight and put us drawing that more often than in 4-card PLO. So we got to be careful not overvaluing these draws here once again. We do turn the nuts though, and the SPR is a little bit larger than 2. He bets 240, and we obviously are going to jam. Let's have a look what our opponent shows up here. Ace, ace, jack, jack 8. So the flop position is pretty standard. On the turn, he bets 240. Kind of surprising to utilize this bet sizing. I think he has a great hand in order to cooler a hand like 2 kings or ace king in this spot. And I would probably suggest to definitely continue betting if he wants to go for this sort of smaller sizing. I'm not sure if you really want to do that, thinking about all the bad river cards that are possible. But I don't think it's a big deal either. So all the money goes in and we stack. Next up here, we are now playing 3-handed with a Queen 8, 7-5-6. This hand should be an easy open. I mean, if we look into the double suited hands on the button in terms of the ranking, again, the ranking is not everything, but double suited on the button is pretty valuable because we're going to be ending up heads up very often, and the 2 suits can definitely help. So a double suited hand in terms of the ranking, this can definitely take a while. Now it doesn't, still goes like the average rank here is 38.27, but it still goes to 100. So we do need some features here. And in 4-card PLO, like most of the double suited hands are raises on the button. Here they probably are not. So we open raise and we flop a massive hand, then not straight here with 5-6, 2 backdoor flush draws, and also some redraws, 2 bigger straight draws, holding 6-8 here. So a 5 is going to make us a bigger nut straight. I decided to bet really small to induce potentially a raise. And I think that I probably prefer to check back my hand. Again, in 5-card PLO, card removal becomes even more important. And when you think about all the components that I have here, the 5, 6, 7, 8, I'm basically blocking everything that is possible. So that combined with the idea that the button open raising range will feature even less low cards than in 4-card PLO. Because in 4-card PLO, it's easier to have a hand like ace king 5-6 or ace king 5-4, like these kind of hands, and justify open raising. Where in 5-card PLO, you're going to have higher cards much more often, and when you have low trash, you're just going to fold. So for that reason, I would think blocking everything on the board here, I want to go for a check back, especially if my opponent doesn't lead the flop. When he doesn't lead the flop, the reason I mentioned that is because our opponent is probably going to have a leading range on 7-3-4, given that the board is so low and it doesn't hit my open raising range that much. So when he doesn't lead into me, he probably already has a capped range and is going to fold very often. So I think we have a great hand to actually check back and play some turns in position. But as it is, we are betting small, which I think is the second best option I would like to induce here. And my opponent goes ahead and check raises. There's no reason really for me to come over the top. Sure, we could cooler another straight by holding the 2 backdoor flush draws and the higher straight draw with the 6-8, but I think we're better off just trying to induce our opponents to potentially put more money in on the turn. There's basically no bad turn card, apart from the card that is about to roll off here, which is the 4 of hearts, unfortunately. And at which point our opponent decides to check here in a second. Again, I'm sorry for the overlap of other screens. So at this point, I do want to bet because I think protection is more important in this format than in 4 card. Our opponent can definitely have backdoor hearts here or turn the random 4. In his shoes, if I had a 4, I would certainly bet my hand, not only because protection is more important, but also because I think there's a decent shot 5-6 can actually fold by the river. And I don't think he had a lot of boats here, just because I'm also blocking the boats by holding a 7. And I don't think in 5 card PLO people are going to check raise the flop with 3-4, for example. Even with 4-7, not that much. It's mainly going to be 7-7-5, 7-7-6. It seems very unlikely given the holding that I have. So I did bet the turn for protection. And also there is a possibility that he might be folding 5-6 at this point. River is a 9 of hearts. Definitely not great. We're hoping to chop here with 5-6, but he ends up showing with trip force and the ace high flush draw. So he did check raise the flop with the blockers, the 2 6s in his hand, and then when he turned trips, ended up check calling. I really wouldn't mind actually double barreling the turn card here, but it probably at the end of the day is not going to make a huge difference, because if I bet call the flop with somewhat of a float like ace deuce 5, these types of hands, then I'm probably going to fold anyway. And if I do have a straight, I'm probably going to peel one more street. But that being said, I would probably go for a big double barrel with the 4x just to have a chance to make 5-6 fold by the river. Next hand, we are cold calling a 10-9, 8-7-6. Seems to be a great hand, but again, it is only single suited and probably not that great multi-way. Let me just have a look into the Range Explorer. Because the hand is not equity driven, I don't think it's going to have a great rating, but I think given how connected this hand actually is, it's going to do quite okay, or quite good, generally speaking. So we are single suited, and it is ranked, an average rank here of 41.7. Again, I think in reality we can actually up that ranking and put it to a better number. Not massively, but it's definitely a playable hand in most circumstances, I feel like. Just because of how connected the hand actually is. Once you add in a few gaps, I think it changes the quality of the starting hand quite a bit. I'm going to get back here to the screen in a second. So we did flop top 2 pair and a wrap. I mean, the money obviously goes in. Our opponent, who was squeezing upon the flop here, we're going to have a look into his hand in a moment. He has double suited aces, ace, 9, 5, 6. Seems to be completely fine. He flopped 2 pair with 1 backdoor flush draw. Arguments for trapping potentially. I think he wants to have a better hand to trap, to be honest. He's still going to get enough action here, even if I just have a hand like an open-ender or a hand like a 9. Because when you do have a 1 pair holding in 5 card PLO, you just have more equity against the aces portion. You end up holding more backdoor flush draws and more 2 pair outs. So I think slow playing is probably not as crucial in 5 card PLO, because you are going to get action a ton and you also need more protection. So I think actually play this hand good, and obviously we want to get the money in. I think we split the first one with 9-6, both of us, and the second one we win. I'm not even sure. Let me just double check. So on the second one we have a straight, we don't have a straight, we have still 2 pair, our opponent has also 2 pairs, so we end up splitting both. Next up, I'll make a very marginal decision here. I don't know why. I might have been intrigued by the connectivity of this hand, 8, 7, 6, 5, 3, but we can already, I mean, it's very clear to me that this hand is going to have a very weak ranking because of the raw equity, but also opening this hand in MP on a loose table where a lot of players are going to come in, it's just going to be a massive mistake. If I get squeezed, like, what are we supposed to do, really? Are we going to call with a bunch of players behind us if the small blind is going to squeeze with a hand that is dominated so much more often post-flop than it can dominate, which is really the name of the game here in 5 card. So we have 8, 7, 6, 5, 3. And our hand is double suited, but it really doesn't add much value here. We're looking at a 54% average rank. And I would actually decrease the rating for that when you calibrate for MP at a loose table. Like, the hand is ranked even lower, in my opinion, thinking about the context of the situation, which is we are in middle position, it's a loose table, and we're gonna get called by a lot of players. Like, the hand against one opponent is probably not going to do that bad, but if there is a high likelihood we're going to run into multiple players, it is going to lose a lot of value. So I don't like that. Let's see what happens. Oh yeah, I think I know what happens, and well, nothing positive for sure. So this guy folds and we get squeezed now, and I decided to make the call, which I do think is a mistake. The hand in itself is a mistake to open raise, but calling here is even a bigger mistake with the player behind us. There are going to be so many flops where we have to make a stack off decision and we are probably behind against 1 or 2 opponents even. It's just such a higher chance of that domination situation than in 4 cards that we really need to make a fold here pre. So the button calls and we do flop a straight on 7-6-4. I don't think there is as much of a need for the squeezer to balance here with his flop nut flushes, just because of 2 factors. Number 1, he's going to have the flushes much more often, given how easy it is to have a double suited hand. Number 2, he needs more protection. It's more likely he runs into 3 pairs or sets against 10 cards, so 2 opponents. So therefore, I would be fast playing quite a bit here. If you do happen to have the ace of spades, I think it's a huge blocker that you want to utilize very often, just because it is hard to have an unsuited ace in this game, given how often you will find another card in your hand that will match the suit, given you have more cards in your hand. But we end up checking it down. We're going to have a look at showdown here. We actually end up winning this hand. And our opponent shows down ace, ace, jack, 4 deuce double suited, which I think is completely fine. Like, these double suited aces against the loose behavior of myself, even in this hand, is just gonna crush so often. And I think one of the mistakes we will see down the road here from a lot of newcomers is that they are gonna call with a lot of double suited trash hands like my own, and they just get owned over and over again, flopping 2 pair and a flush draw against a better hand that has more equity, like the overpair and a straight draw and a flush draw and a backdoor flush draw. And I think that is going to happen very, very often. So squeezing these double suited aces has a ton of value in this game. And we ended up being very lucky there. Now over to a hand that was very challenging. I'm not sure if I'm able to figure out the answer to this hand. We're gonna see it just any moment. So we got ace, king, queen, queen, deuce, double suited. Let us first of all start off by looking into the ranking. We have ace, king, queen, queen, deuce, double suited of a trip suit. This hand is ranked 5.67 on average, so very strong holding, of course. Get a raise and a call. The meta game here is that players are open raising loose, they are cold calling loose, and they're cold calling with dominated hands. So with my ace high suit and my king high suit, I decided to squeeze. I guess the king high suit is even weaker in this game, a lot weaker than in a 4-card PLO game, so something to consider, but it still seems to be a reasonable decision. So we do get 4-bet, and the question is, are we going to flop smooth enough? And I'm not sure if I can figure out the answer. We're going to try though. So we're going to look into the equity distribution. And first of all, we're going to assume we're just against one opponent to figure out whether or not it is profitable, or most likely profitable, to continue here. So ace, king, queen, queen, deuce. We are double suited with a trip suit. And let's say we are up against all possible aces. So we're going to go to the questions tab and put in the graph, not the graph, the equity breakdown. No, I'm sorry, the graph right there. And I'm going to look at our hand versus our opponent's range. So obviously we are in bad shape because we're dominated in terms of raw equity. We are looking at 36, 37%. And now what's more interesting is the distribution, which is going to help us to understand how often will we realize our equity in a reasonably positive way. And we can see that, you know, when you think about the flop, we need very little equity in order to get the money in. Even if we're heads up, the SPR even heads up will be a lot lower than SPR1, I mean, a lot lower in this specific case. So this doesn't look too bad, to be honest. Like, it's certainly not a great situation, but we're still going to have like 30% equity 50% at a time, and that's definitely a lot smoother than a lot of PLO 4-card situations. Just to compare this graph here with 4 cards, and let's say we had ace, king, queen, queen double suited against the aces. Let's have a look what matchup this actually is going to be. So far it looks in terms of equity is quite similar, a little bit worse. 35, 36% equity. Have a look at the graph here in a moment. Obviously the 2 suits really help. Okay, so 5 cards, which we're going to look at right now, is 36.8. 4 cards is 35.1 or 2. And this is the difference in graph. So a huge drop, 30% equity, around 42% at a time. And comparing this with the 5-card situation, definitely smoother. Again, we have 30% equity, 50% at a time. And then if we compare that with the most extreme example, which would be the single suited ace, king, king, queen, for example, which is a classic fold in 5 cards and 4-card PLO, ace, ace, king, queen, single suited. Then we are looking here at a, looks like 30% equity and very, very rough distribution. Yeah, so I would say, putting it all together here, this is going to be a profitable call. We're not going to make a lot of money, but we're probably going to make more money than we lose by calling instead of folding. So we do flop 2 pair, and I mean, from this point on, it can go either way. We can shove or we can check. Our opponent is going to call every single time here. He has only 400 left. And the money goes in. He ends up having double suited aces, not a big surprise. He would probably 4-bet with any aces anyway. But unfortunately, it makes the backdoor flush. We actually all make the backdoor flush. The jack or the ace, jack, jack, 9-8 double suited makes the flush as well. And then the second one, we get counterfeited here with the 6 on the turn, and we end up losing a pot. One more hand here that is actually really interesting. I have to think about it quite a bit. So we're playing heads up PLO, 150 big blinds deep. And I do flop the overpair of aces and a gut shot with 2 spades exactly. I decided to c-bet, and I think this is a little bit more marginal than I think. And now, obviously, c-betting makes money. It is profitable, no question. But when you think about the importance of blockers, of runouts, when you think about the likelihood that I will have a blocker from the board, a backdoor flush draw, or a better straight draw so much more often than with this particular hand, I think this is actually a good candidate to check back. And I would never check this type of hand back in a 4-card PLO because we just end up doing so much better against Queen X. But here, there's a higher chance our opponent has sets and better runouts and backdoor flush draws. And I would be looking into a slight improvement on this hand to justify c-betting. I think this is a good one to pot control and check behind. So the main adjustment that we have to make here is to think more about runouts, more about blockers on the board, more about backdoor equity, and nuttiness. And this hand, if you really think about it, doesn't have that much. We have that nut flush draw. That is really the best asset we have. And then we have the gutter, which is non-nutted. We have the set outs, which are non-nutted. But a lot of the run outs aren't going to be great for us. Let's say our opponent goes ahead and calls a bet in the turn is, let's say, Jack of Hearts. Like, yeah, we're probably going to go ahead and continue again. And if he check raises, we're going to call. But he's going to have Queen Queen or Queen Jack or Queen Jack 10-9 on the turn much more often than in 4-card PLO. So just recognize that if your other 3 cards are really bad, then it makes it much likelier your opponent has a really good hand. So we do get check raised, and of course we're going to call. And now imagine our opponent pots the turn card, which will probably happen really frequently. Like, we're not going to do great, but we will have to call. He ends up checking at around SPR 4 to 5, and I think this is a reasonable SPR for him to go for a check jam if he has 2 queens. So I decided to check myself. And I actually think my opponent, who was actually bluffing the flop here, has a pretty good case for bluffing the river. I think if in my shoes I had a hand like Queen 5 or Queen 7, I would much rather bet the turn and then bet fold Queen 5 if I get jammed for my entire stack. And him, he really has the bottom of his range at this point. So he did decide to check raise the flop here with the middle pair blocker and 3-6 of spades. It seems spewy. The question is it really? He definitely has some blockers here and a case for check raising. I think it is a reasonable candidate to pick. Backdoor diamonds as well, like backdoor diamond draw. Sorry, backdoor diamond flush blocker makes sense as well. So honestly, I don't mind it that much. I would have probably bluffed the river. I don't mind it that much. But I think the more interesting part about it is my decision on the flop, and I think we have a good case here to check back. And with that hand, we're going to close down the second part of the session review. Hope you guys are enjoying the series. We still have around twice as much footage as we already went through in this session review, and we're going to continue on part 3. See you the next time. Jane Anders for the PLO Mastermind, over and out.